Thank you very much, Vicky. It's a pleasure for me to be with you and walk you through the 2022 retrospective. As you see in the outline, we have a lot to cover. For regular attendees, rest assured we included the expected and usual statistics, but we also introduced new analysis this year. Some section will go faster and we will spend more time on other sections just to make sure we cover everything and we keep some time at the end for the question period. We will not cover certain statistics like for claimant or dispensing fee, but they are included in the appendices because a lot of you are looking for those statistics. Before we start into the content, let's review some basic information. All the data and the results I will be sharing with you are from TELUS Health portfolio. When I will be talking about a certificate, it's the covered employee and the linked dependents, and insured as one individual. When I talk about utilization, it's the number of eligible claims per certificate. I will refer often at eligible amount. We don't take into account any plan design or cost-sharing feature. All the data shared are for insured under age 64 or less. And also the trend I will be talking about is a historical trend. It's not meant to be a future trend or prediction of what can happen in the future. Now, let's look at the key results, and let's share what everybody's looking for. The change in eligible cost per certificate, 2.6% in Canada in 2022. So I will refer to that number as the trend, the portfolio trend, or 2022 trend. So it's a variation, the increase in the eligible cost per certificate. So how does that look in the different regions in Canada? Let's start with the West region. So we see 4.5%. It's higher than the global average of 2.6. It's a bit surprising because we were used in the past to a lower result out west. This is explained mostly by claims for the diabetes class and ADHD mostly, and also because biosimilar switch now is behind us. BC, for example, started in 2019. If we look on the right, we see a decrease in Quebec and a small increase of 1% in the Atlantic. This is mostly driven by the biosimilar switch that happened in 2022 and just before that in the Atlantic region. Ontario at 3.6% is slightly higher than the Canadian average. Now, we will split that trend into its two components, namely the change in the eligible cost per claim and also the utilization. So let's start with the change in the eligible amount per claim. We see in Canada that the result is 2.3%. What does that mean is most of the 2.6% trend is explained by this increase in the eligible amount. We see that the different regions like West is aligned, Ontario is slightly higher, and Quebec and Atlantic are lower, once again driven by the bio switch that happened in those two regions. Now we look at the change in utilization per certificate. So you see that the global average for Canada, which is the global portfolio, is 0.2%. And there's more variability in the different regions, and we see even a decrease of 2.5% in Quebec. We show you also the average age of the certificates in 2021 and 2022. A portion of this variability can be explained by the demographics of the insured population. Now let's look at the key results by region. So there's a lot of information here. I'll just walk you through the Canadian results. So eligible annual cost per certificate, $1,240. So this is the figure that increases by 2.6%. The average eligible amount per claim is $85.39, the 2.3%. And the yearly utilization per certificate, 14.5, fairly stable. And you have the average age of certificates. So you have the same information, same data for West, Ontario, Quebec, and Atlantics. And I will not cover everything in detail, but what you see here is similar at what we have seen in the past years. So now we will look at the drug type utilization to explain the 2.6% trend in the portfolio. So here we look at single source brand, multi-source brand, and generic. Just to make sure we talk about the same thing, single source brand is protected by a patent, and this includes biologic drugs and biosimilars. Multi-source brand is, these are drugs for which the patent has expired, and a generic is a copy of the brand. So once again, we look in those three categories, how do we explain the 2.6% trend that you have on the right-hand side in the graph. So basically, you see that the single source brand, the impact is 1.9%. So this is mostly, once again, driven by the biosimilar switch. We look at multi-source brand, 4.7, which is higher. Basically, this is a smaller category. There is more variability, in that category. And also, we saw a few drugs that increased, for example, ADHD. Generic, it's a combination of cost per claim and utilization that explain the 4% versus the average of 2.6, Now here we look at the same three categories, single source brand, multi-source brand, and generic, but we look at utilization percentage. So the figures you have there is the percentage of claims. So let's look at the 2022 results. 66%, 2/3 of the claims were for generic drugs. So this is the number of claims that was submitted to TELUS Health. 7% was submitted for multi-source brand, and 27% for single source brand. You see the results in 2021 are exactly the same, so pretty stable. And if you look back in the past until 2018, you see some slight differences, but still fairly consistent result with a slight increase of the generic utilization. Now, let's look at the utilization, but as a percentage of eligible amount. So if we look at the 2022 results here, we see it's quite the opposite. So single source brand represents 68% of the total eligible amounts. So basically, and generic represent 25%. So it's the opposite. And the single source, we're not surprised. These are more expensive drugs in that category. And we see that 7% is for the multi-source brand. As I mentioned, it's a smaller category, so a bit more variability here. We see once again that the results are fairly stable with 2021 comparable and fairly stable over the years. So now we introduce here a new feature, including we will include more new features from here on, including the present sections. What we look here is the managed plans versus non-managed plan. Before I share the results with you, I'll just explain quickly. Managed plan, we mean a plan for which they use a managed drug list. So basically, a managed drug list is a list of drugs that are covered by the plan. For example, can be a mimic of a provincial drug list, could be a personalized drug list, or even it could be TELUS Health managed drug list. So let's look at how they compare. So all the plans, we put together all the plans who do have a managed list and all the other plans who do not have a managed list, or we call it a standard list. So basically, you see that the 2.3% change in eligible amount per claim. So we look at that statistic here. The variation for non-managed plan is 2.4, and the managed plan is lower at 1.7. For those of you who wonder, in TELUS Health block of business, the managed plan represent about 20% of the eligible claims in amount in dollars, compared to the non-managed, which represent 80% of the claims that were submitted. So if we continue our analysis of managed versus non-managed plans, let's look at the green line for the non-managed plan. So here we look at the data from 2018 up to 2022. So the average amount per claim in 2018 was $75, and you see the evolution increase over the years, and now it's $89 in 2022. This is a 19% increase. If we look at that increase over the period, it's 4.4% on an annual basis. Now let's look at the plan who do have a managed drug list. So the average amount eligible per claim was $67 in 2018, and now in 2022 it's $75. So this is a trend of 12% or 2.9% per year. So first thing that we do see here is 1.5% difference in trend between the managed and non-managed plans. If you look also at the 2022 result, $75 being the average amount per claim compared to $89, this is a 17% difference in favor of the managed plans. So if we look now at the results of the 2022 portfolio by looking at the therapeutic classes. So here we have a lot of information. Let's review what's there. So it's the top 10 list. Diabetes is now number 1. So this is the biggest change this year from second place last year to number 1 spot this year. If you look at rheumatoid arthritis, I will use RA. It's easier for me. RA was first last year and it's second this year. So RA has been first for the past decade. So it's a big change this year. And when you look on the right-hand side, you have the percentage of total eligible amount per class. So RA went from 12.6 to 11.2. That's an important decrease there. If we continue and look at the results, we'll focus on what changed. Asthma and depression, they just changed place from 5th to 4th and 4th to 5th. And you see that the weight in the total eligible amount is 5.3, 5.2, so pretty similar for those two categories. A new comer on the top 10 is gastrointestinal, from 11th place last year to 10th place this year. So it's interesting to see this result. For those of you who wonder who was 10th last year and was kicked out, it was the ulcer category that is 11th this year. So now we take each of those therapeutic classes and we split them, look at what's the trend of each class. So we look at the eligible cost per certificate for each of those classes. So diabetes is number 1 at plus 10.5%. Remember, please, this figure because I will be talking more about diabetes later and we'll come back to that result. RA, we see minus 9% for that category. Biosimilar switch had a big impact. I have to talk also about multiple sclerosis, which is farther down the right in 8th place. So minus 9.1. So it's a smaller, it's a bit more volatile because the pool of patient is smaller in that category, but also there's one drug which switched in Quebec. This is a complex drug. This is not a biologic, but it was in the policy, the switch policy, so that had an impact there. So let's come back with the other classes that do increase. Skin disorder, plus 7.5. Asthma, plus 10.6. There's also depression, plus 2.7, and ADHD at 15.7%. With all those classes at big increases. So basically, and we finish with the gastrointestinal at plus 2.1, and we put all the other classes together in the last category. If we look, last message that I can share here, blood pressure, a decrease of 6.6%. So what we've seen in that category is a reduction in the cost per claim and also utilization. That explain this decrease. So here, that's a new analysis that we've done this year. So we start with the global portfolio trend of 2.6%, And what we do is we look at each of the therapeutic classes and look at their impact on that global trend of 2.6%. So let's start with the first place, diabetes. So diabetes contributed plus 1.3% to the global trend. We move to RA, minus 1.1, skin disorder plus 0.6, asthma plus 0.5, so on and so forth, until we come back to the 2.6%. So here you see like what's the impact of each of those therapeutic classes. So a few things to share here. First, the all others is plus 1.1, which is a big portion of the overall portfolio trend. This is due to one drug. We'll come back to that later also during the presentation. So if we look also at the categories that increased a lot, you see that a couple of drugs had the biggest impact, the category, had the biggest impact on the overall portfolio trend. Many of those results will come back later during the presentation and look more in details. So here what we have done, we took the top 6 among the top 10, and we looked at the variation in eligible cost per certificate over the period 2018 to 2022. So we established 2018 as the reference year at 1.0, and you will see the variation as I start sharing the results. So top one, the number one was diabetes. So what it means here, it's a relative value. We start 2018, and it's 1.46% in 2022. That means that this category increased by 46% during the period. If we look at RA, we see that there's an important shift in 2021. So the overall during the period increase is 5%, but you see that the biologic switch had a big impact in 2021. Now we look at skin disorders. So you see 70% increase in skin disorders. It increased at a constant rhythm. We see depression, 17%. It's almost a straight line, so we see more usage in that category. Now, asthma, it's interesting also to look at that. It's 8% over the period, but when you look from year to year, you see a decrease in 2020 and 2021. This is the impact of COVID, and then an important increase in 2022. Once again, we'll look deeper into that and explain why this happened. ADHD, 68% increase over the period, with, I would say, kind of an acceleration from 2020 on. So what we'll do is we look at those three last categories, depression, asthma, and ADHD more in detail. Let's start with depression. So here, once again, there's a lot of information, so I'll try to go slowly and share everything that's there. So you have Canada, the overall portfolio results on the left-hand side, and then you have all the regions, and you have 2018 to 2022. So what we can share here is, let's start with 2022 compared to 2021. So overall average in portfolio went down. It's not the average, sorry. Here, I forgot to tell you, we're talking about the percentage of claimants. So we took the claimants who used that class of drugs, and we divided by the total number of claimants. So it's like the statistics we're sharing. So 19% of claimants used this category in 2022 compared to 20% the previous years. If you look at all the regions, we see it's fairly stable and slightly decreasing 2022 compared to 2021. If we look at the Atlantic region, it's higher. Even in 2022, it was the same in the previous years, and Ontario is lower, West and Quebec being at the same level, pretty much. Now we move on to asthma, once again, as a percentage of claimant to see utilization. So let's start with the 2022 results. You see higher usage of asthma classification drugs within that class in 2022. So basically, those results were probably, when we look at the data, we saw a lot of increase during the fall 2022. The virus season has been tougher. It hit very hard during the fall of 2022, and long COVID also has an impact on that category. The lowest we've seen being 2021, and what's interesting to see also is the 2022 result is even higher than the pre-COVID results for that category. I have to mention, if you remember when we looked at the trend for this category in the different classes, it was 10.6% for asthma, so mainly driven by higher utilization. Now let's look at ADHD, once again as a percentage of claimant. So first we start with the 2022 results. So you see Quebec is higher. This is expected. This was the case in the previous years. And you see followed by Atlantic, West, and Ontario lower. The average of claimants using that category is 5.9% across Canada. What we did is we looked at the same information, the percentage of claimants, in the past years, starting in 2018. So we see here that the overall Canadian increase was 72%. Once again, TELUS Health portfolio. But we see out west it doubled, pretty close to doubling in Ontario, and 88% increase in Atlantic, while Quebec was increasing the number of the percentage of claimant by 30% over the same period. So even though Quebec is higher, the other regions contributed to the overall increase during the period. Now we looked, last look at ADHD. This is the percentage of adult claimants. So once again, we look over the years. If we look at the 2022 data, it's half of the claimants. So what we did is we looked only at people who use that category. We looked at the adults and divided by the total of people who use that category. So what we see is one person, one user out of two is an adult. An adult here was defined as an employee or a dependent. And you see the results are pretty much similar and constant. Quebec is a bit lower with the utilization per adults. For those of you who have an eye and see the details, you will notice 2018, we don't have any result in Ontario and Canada. This is due to the impact of HOIP Plus with the coverage for the children. So we removed this data for the Ontario and Canadian result. So now we looked at, we took a closer look at the top 6 within the top 10. But what's also interesting is to look at the top 5 emerging classes and look at the trend over the period 2018 to 2022. Once again, here we use the relative cost per certificate, and we establish 2018 as the basis with a value of 1. So first, we look at gastrointestinal, which was 11th last year and is 10th this year. We see over the period 27% increase. Cystic fibrosis, 3.10, which means 210% increase. So it's a big increase here. It's mostly driven over the period by the CFTR modulator class. We'll come back to that a bit later in the presentation. Migraines, 47% over the period. Migraines was 28 ranked last year within the therapeutic classes, and it's up to 23rd rank this year. Rare disease, 73% over the period. Rare disease is a category that's been increasing. As you see, it's fairly stable over the years. It was 34th last year, and it's 27th this year in the rank, so going up. Last category in this top 5 we'll look at is the weight control. So what's interesting here with weight control, it's 126% increase, but it's a lot when we consider that only a handful of plans are covering that category of drugs. So basically, we'll look at it further during the presentation. It's an interesting category. More and more plan sponsors are interested to include it, but as you see, the overall weight is increasing within the results. Last thing I will mention is we did the exercise for the whole portfolio during the period, and the trend would be 15% for the whole portfolio. So all those categories, classes are higher than the global portfolio trend. Now, let's have a look at the top 5 declining classes in TELUS Health portfolio. Same period, 2018 to 2019, and same approach with the relative costs. So if we look at those drugs, we have blood pressure, we have antibiotics, birth control, anti-inflammatory, and also hepatitis. So if we look at hepatitis, we're not surprised, 0.29, meaning a 71% decrease. It's a cure for a disease, and also the peak was reached many years ago. The other 4 categories are roughly, in average, decreasing by 20%, but the story is not exactly the same. Let's review that. Blood pressure was 7th in 2018, and now it's 9th in 2019. So we see both a cost and utilization decrease for that category. Antibiotics, minus 22%, but you see that there's an increase 21 to 22, probably post-COVID impact in that category. And finally, for birth control, I'll let you guess. Your guess is as good as mine to explain the decrease in that category. But talking of birth control, it's important to look at it. British Columbia announced in its 2023 budget that this category will now be covered. It's going to be free access under pharmacare. So we just took a look at the results, and they will cover IUDs, hormonal injection and implants, and also oral contraceptive and emergency oral contraceptive. So we'll look at all of those products in that category in the overall portfolio and also in BC. So let's start with BC. So birth control was 2.6% of the claims last year in 2022. So what it means is with now pharmacare taking in charge, it's maximum 2.6% decrease that we can expect. For plan sponsors who have a Canadian workforce, it's going to depend where, in which province your employees are located. But basically, this is the maximum expected decrease in the claims we can expect. The other provinces are at 1.8%. It's going to be interesting to see if other provinces do follow with coverage of birth control. Some of them started to talk about it, but nothing was announced yet. So this concludes our analysis of the different therapeutic classes. Now let's move into the product analysis. With the same kind of information with the top 10 products, again by eligible amount. So you have on the right-hand side the percentage of total eligible amount for the year 2022 compared to 2021. You have the change and the ranking. So first thing I have to mention here, Remicade is still the first product. It was first last year, but you see that the percentage of total eligible amount was 4.8%. Now it's 3.8%. We see also Humira going from second to third place, 4.1% of total eligible amount to 2.2%. Once again, this is the impact of the biosimilar switch on those two products. Now let's look at Ozempic. Ozempic was fourth last year. This year it's second. However, you see the percentage, 2.1 to 3.7%, which is a fairly important increase. What we did in the data, because it changed really quickly in 2022, so we analyzed the weight on the total portfolio month by month during the year 2022. So when we looked at January 2022, Ozempic was 2.7% of total eligible amount. And when we look in December 2022, it's 4.8. So once again, the average is 3.7, but it changed quickly during the year. So we do expect Ozempic to be number one this year, if it's not already the case. There's also a newcomer, but from 95th place to 8th place, Trikafta, basically 0.1 to 1.4%. So this is to treat cystic fibrosis. Basically, and it's a fairly new drug, so we'll come back to that a bit later. Here we did the same analysis to look at the change in eligible cost per certificate for each of those products. So here you have a focus on Trikafta. Why? Because it's off chart, 1,224% increase. So Trikafta, it's once again treat cystic fibrosis, and notably it gave access to a pool of patients that was not properly treated or not treated before, hence the big change. So now let's go back to our regular scale and look at the other products within the top 10. So let's start with Remicade and Humira. You see the change in eligible cost per certificate during the year, minus 19.1 and minus 29.1%, once again influenced by the biosimilar switch. When we look at Ozempic, the increase is 78% in 2022. I have to just open a parenthesis here and just talk about, it was mentioned and reported in the media that this drug is really efficient for weight control, and it could have been used for that treatment. However, it's approved to treat type 2 diabetes. So basically, we looked at the data, but we couldn't find with the data we had any evidence to say yes or no that this happened. There's a drug, though, equivalent, Wegovy, that's being approved, that has been approved by Health Canada, but yet it's not available in Canada. It's not commercialized yet. And as I mentioned before, weight control is a category that is included more often in the plan. So it's going to be interesting to see how those two drugs evolve in 2023 in the future. Let's look at Vyvanse and Concerta. So 24.9% and 19.1%. These are products to treat ADHD. If you remember, maybe not, but the category, the class was, the increase was 16%. So we can see that those two products explain most of the increase of their class. Finally, let's look at Symbicort, 19.2% increase. Once again, asthma, the increase was 10.6 for the category, so it's mostly driven by this specific product. So we did the same analysis here with the different products to reconstruct, I would say, the overall portfolio trend of 2.6%. So let's start with Remicade, number one. You see Remicade contributes to a decrease of 0.9%, Ozempic an increase of 1.7%, then Humira 1.2%, and so on and so forth with the other products. You see here, if we go right and look at Trikafta, Trikafta contributes 1.3%. I told you in the all others class, it was explained by one product. This is the product Trikafta that's explaining, because the trend of the class was 1.1%, so driven by this product. So in conclusion, we can see on the graph that the two products, Ozempic and Trikafta, were important factors to explain the overall trend of 2.6% in 2022. So here we take a look at the class, the impact of the product Ozempic within the diabetes class. So we look at the trend in the product. So once again, the category I told you to remember that number, 10.5%. You see it here. And you see that Ozempic explains, the impact of Ozempic, was 13.8%. So majority of the variation in that class is explained by Ozempic. If we look at Januvia and Januvia, we see a decrease there. So it's probably under the effect of a switch to GLP-1 class drugs. We see Novorapid and Humalog also, which decrease, an impact of the biosimilar switch in that case. So let's now look at the specialty drug and biosimilar drugs and how we see them change in 2022. Before we do that, just quickly, a specialty drug is a drug that costs more than $10,000. It's a complex treatment and special delivery, and also biologic drugs and biosimilars are included in that category. So let's look at the impact of those two type of drugs in the overall trend of 2.6% that we explored earlier. So let's look on the left-hand side at the Canadian results. So you have 3.4% increase for traditional drugs, and you have 0.9% increase for specialty drug. So the lower result for specialty drug is driven by the biosimilar switch. If we look at Quebec and Atlantic with the decrease in the specialty drug, this explains the lower result across Canada. The West region, if we split between traditional and specialty drug, you see traditional trending at 5.4 compared to the 2.3 for the specialty drug. Once again, I told you West was trending, the overall was 4.5%. If we do the average of traditional and specialty, it's 4.5. So you see that it's a traditional drug that contributed to the trend in the West region. Mostly, for example, ADHD is within that traditional drugs class, and it's a contributor in those results. You see Ontario fairly stable at 3.5 and 3.9 respectively, and you have all the other results there. So now we continue to explore the specialty drug distribution. We are in Canada. There's a lot of information here. So we cover 2018 to 2022. Let's start with the percentage of claimants here. So we took, it's just the percentage of people who use a specialty drug, the claimants who use a specialty drug, divided by the total number of claimants. So it was 1.1% in 2018, and it's up to 1.7% in 2022. If we compare the 2022 result to the 2021 result at 1.4, it's an important increase. Now let's look at the percentage of eligible amount in green. So what it means is all the specialty drugs in amount eligible, what it represents compared to the total eligible amount, total claims, I can say, within the portfolio. So we see that from 2018 to 2021, this figure was increasing steadily to up to 34% of the total claims in 2021, eligible claims. And now it's decreasing in 2022 to 33%. First time we see a decrease in the recent years. You have also the average cost per certificate that's presented, $17,900 in 2022, compared to $21,800 in 2021. So that explains why this category is a bit as a lower percentage in 2022 compared to 2021. The average the reduction in the average cost offset the increase in the number, the percentage of claimants here. So now we look at the same data, but across the Canadian regions in 2022. So Canadian results are exactly the same that we were looking, 2022 results. And let's look at what are the similarities or differences in the different regions. So we look at the West regions. We see it's lower percentage of claimants, the eligible percentage of eligible amount, and also the average. This is influenced by pharmacare. We see that Atlantic as the highest percentage of eligible amount, followed by Quebec and lower, a bit lower in Ontario. For those who wonder, this is the 2022 results, but I can just share that West and Ontario, there's an increase actually in the percentage of eligible amount by 1%. And there's a slight decrease in Quebec in Atlantic, 2022 compared to 2021. So let's continue to explore this specialty drug category. Biosimilar switch was initiated by BC in 2019. So here, the darker color shows all the provinces and territory who actually made the switch. The paler color is the regions, the territories and provinces who announced a change coming or in the making, Ontario being one of them. And you still have three territories, one territory and two provinces who didn't make an announcement about making a switch or not. We will look at the Canadian results, the utilization of biosimilar. And just after that, we will take a closer look at BC and Quebec, because BC initiated the change. It was done by phases, and Quebec did it last year, end of 2021, early 2022, but it was done on a shorter period. So we'll see what's similar and what's different in those two provinces. So here, what we see is the figures that you see, the percentages that are there, are the percentage of the total number of claims for these two types of drugs. So what we did before we start looking at the result is we looked at all the claims for biologic and biosimilar. We added this number, and we took the biosimilar number of claims and divided by the total to look at the utilization of the biosimilar. So if we look month by month, why? You will see when we look at the results in BC and Quebec, but you see some inflection points. So there's some increases, but it was done at different times in different regions of Canada, explaining those results. January 2019, the utilization of biosimilar compared to the total number of claims in that category was 4%. December 2022, it's 30%. So it's an important increase, and we will look at the contributions of BC and Quebec specifically in those results. So BC, same period as we were looking just before. You see that May 2019 was the first transition period, and you see an increase during that period. So 5% roughly in early 2019, up to 23% after the first phase. And then you see the inflection point in time, up to 65% utilization today of the biosimilar in that province. Basically, one thing I have to mention, we don't expect 100%. It's not all the products that do switch to biosimilar, and also there's always exceptions. Now let's have a closer look at Quebec and compare the results. There's, once again, a lot of information here. So let's look at what we provide here. You have the results, once again, percentage of utilization of biosimilars in Quebec. And you have also all other provinces without a switch. So we took all the provinces who did not make the switch, and we compare the result of utilization in biosimilar in those provinces, and you will see the opportunity, I can say, or the gap between those two results. So basically, let's look at Quebec. Quebec started in January 2021 at 10%. You see the transition period, end of 2021, early 2022. So the curve accelerates kind of quickly there. And you see the final results really similar to BC at 65% utilization in Quebec. If we look at all the other provinces, we see that the utilization was 7% in January 2021. It doubled, although they didn't make a switch to biosimilar, but it's at 15%. So there's a big difference in those two results. I'll come back to that a bit later, why we talk about this bio switch and everything, but basically it can be interesting to help manage costs within the plan, but it's not the only alternative that is there. The private listing agreement can be an interesting tool also to achieve the same result. Now, what we will do is we will, before we conclude the presentation, we will explore four targeted drug classes. And why do we do that? Employers are assessing and exploring more diversity, equity, and inclusion programs. And this includes enhanced benefits offering to their employees. They're also looking to support the health and well-being of their employees, and we will see how they can achieve that. So what we took is 4 different classes. We had the data. It was easily identifiable, but it's not the only categories that can be targeted. So let's look at those 4 categories: vaccines, sexual dysfunction, and weight control, fertility being the last one. Here we show the percentage of plans which cover those specific targeted classes. So you see 2018, and then you see the 2022 result. So basically, it's fairly stable, the percentage of plans who do cover, vaccines being higher than the other 3 categories. And the only one with a more important increase is weight control, almost double during the period. And once again, this is one thing plan sponsors are considering more and more. If we look, I told you that plan sponsors are looking to support health and well-being. So basically, vaccines, for example, could be a good category because it's prevention, and then it supports your employees being more efficient, more productive. And also, why is it maybe more inclusive? If you think about shingle vaccines targeting a specific class of people age 50 and more, then if you cover them, you offer something and you're more inclusive for those categories of people. So once again, this is just an example of what can be done in the plans for plan sponsors who are looking to be more active and proactive. Here, we look at the percentage of plans covering multiple targeted classes. So none of them, 76%. So basically, there's a lot of space for improvement here for plan sponsors who want to address those 2 concerns with their benefits plan. If you look at one class, 19%, probably mostly driven by the vaccines. And if you look at 2, 3, or 4 classes, it's a minority of plans which cover more than one class. So basically, once again, there's an interesting opportunity for the plans to cover those categories of drugs. Basically, how much does that cost? This is a question that is often asked. So what we did is we looked at the 2018 data and compared to 2022. We see the vaccines, it's lower. If you remember, the percentage of plans which cover is slightly higher, so probably the effect of COVID there. Sexual dysfunction, 1.4 to 0.7%. Once again, there was a slight increase in the percentage of plan which cover. What we saw is a decrease in the cost per claimant for that targeted class. Weight control, 0.8 to 1.4. So basically, I was telling you that more plans are covering weight control. This is an example of that. Fertility, pretty stable over the time. So if we add in green all the results for 2022, it's 4.9%. Let's round that to 5%. And if you think that drugs represent about 2/3 of the cost of a healthcare plan, basically you can expect that 3 to 4% increase within your healthcare plan if you do include all those 4 categories. One thing I have to mention, it's influenced by the demography of a group and also the province of residence. For example, shingle is covered by some of the provincial drug plans, and also other vaccines can be covered. But this gives you an idea of the cost of adding those 4 targeted classes. Now, in summary, I talked a lot about biosimilar switch, diabetes, GLP-1 class, cystic fibrosis, CFTR modulators. So what's there? In a nutshell, 2022 for the biosimilar, heavily influenced by Quebec in the results. And once again, we have the specific data, so it's mostly influenced by Quebec. Another large province, Ontario, will do the switch in 2023. So it's going to be interesting to see the results and how the switch is applied. Diabetes, GLP-1 class. So once again, important increase in 2022. We still expect some impact in 2023 in that class. Cystic fibrosis, once again, a game changer in that category, with the expansion of the patient pool. We still expect some kind of an impact in 2023, because 2022, when we look at the data, it's not a full year of claim for most of the users, so it's going to be also affecting 2023 for sure. In conclusion, I talked about cost control and cost management. And I just want to conclude in that area to talk about the toolbox that's available and why it's important. So most of the plan sponsors we talk to in the market right now are not looking to cut costs. They're looking to optimize. So their mindset is, can I have the best costs to treat my employees and keep them active and healthy? So basically, that's why we talked about that and we covered that. And in the toolbox, I talked about the managed drug list that's available, the biosimilar switch. Private listing agreements also is a good way to manage those costs. There's also step therapy I didn't mention that's available, and also prior authorization and many others. The landscape, the industry is evolving really, really quickly, and the solutions are more and more sophisticated. So you have to stay tuned and to follow what's happening. So that would conclude my presentation. So thank you for your interest. I hope that you enjoyed the new analysis we were providing, and that you will have a lot of questions to ask during the question period.